Under the shadow of towering buildings and cobblestone streets slick with rain, a young Lewis Latimer walked alone. His hands were stained with ink and dust from long hours at the patent office. His gaze wandered upwards, watching the dim streetlights flicker weakly against the evening fog. To most, they were just lights. To him, they were possibilities. Years later, those dreams found form. Blueprints scattered across wooden desks, sketches of filaments, circuits, and glowing bulbs. Lewis worked tirelessly, his hands moving with precision and purpose. He imagined a world where cities never slept, where light would conquer the night. But when the patents were published, his name was absent. Credit and glory went to others. The faces of Edison and Bell filled the newspapers, their hands raised in triumph, while Latimer remained at his desk, a nameless shadow. On a cold winter evening, New York City sparkled with electric light, stretching endlessly down every street. Lewis walked slowly along the sidewalk, his coat buttoned tight against the chill. His hand reached out, touching the cold iron of a street lamp, eyes reflecting the glow of thousands of lights. His fingers traced the metal, feeling the pulse of electricity hum through it. He smiled a soft, knowing smile. Though the world had forgotten, the lights would always remember. In a small house lit by the dim glow of an oil lamp, a young boy named Lewis Latimer sat at a wooden table, sketching on a worn-out piece of paper. His small hands moved swiftly, drawing straight lines and simple curves. His mother, Rebecca, sat in the corner of the room, watching her son with hope shining in her eyes. Despite the hardships they faced, Rebecca always believed that Lewis had something special. You know, Lewis, God doesn't give sharp mind to just anyone. He must have big plans for you, she whispered gently. Lewis gave her a small smile before turning back to his drawings. Lewis's father, George Latimer, was a former slave who escaped from Virginia. With the help of abolitionists, George managed to live freely in Boston, though every day was haunted by the fear of being captured again. That fear became real when he was arrested and almost sent back to Virginia. Only through immense public pressure was George set free. However, in 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in the Dred Scott case declared that African Americans, even those who were free, had no rights as citizens. George disappeared soon after, choosing to leave his family behind to protect them from legal threats. He vanished without warning, leaving Rebecca and their children to fend for themselves. The loss forced Lewis to grow up faster than most children his age. He and his siblings were separated. Lewis was sent to a state agricultural school, while his sister stayed with family friends. To survive, young Lewis did odd jobs, selling newspapers, and doing whatever work he could find to help his mother make ends meet. Despite the hardship, his mother always whispered words of encouragement. "You're going to do great things, Lewis. Don't let the world dim your light." One day, a moment that would change everything happened. His mother took him to a factory on the outskirts of town. There, for the first time, Lewis saw electric lights hanging from the ceiling, glowing with a brightness he had never witnessed before. His eyes widened in amazement. "How does that work, Mama?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Rebecca smiled. "That's electricity, son. Brighter than oil lamps," she replied. That answer became the first spark of his endless curiosity. Throughout the journey home, Lewis couldn't stop asking questions. "Can it be made at home? Can I learn how to make it?" His mother just smiled and patted his head lovingly. As Lewis entered his teenage years, he found a job as an office boy at a small patent office in town. His tasks were simple, delivering letters, organizing documents, and keeping the office clean. But amidst his daily routines, Lewis would steal glances at the engineers' desks, where large technical sketches lay scattered. Those drawings seemed to speak to him, showing how electricity flowed, how wires were connected, and how machines were built. One day, an older engineer named Mr. Brown caught him staring at the designs. "You're interested in this, aren't you, son?" he asked. Lewis nodded, a bit nervous. "Come sit. If you want to learn, I'll teach you," Mr. Brown offered with a smile. That day changed everything. Every evening after work, Lewis stayed back to learn how to do technical drawing, how electricity worked, and how machines functioned. Even though he had to hide his notes and sketches under piles of office paperwork, he never gave up. For Lewis, those secret learning sessions were his only way out of poverty and darkness. Under the flickering oil lamp in his small room, Lewis sketched tirelessly. His pencil moved swiftly over the paper, drawing out lamp designs and wire circuits he had imagined in his mind. "I will make a brighter light," he whispered to himself. In the corner of the room, his mother watched him with a hopeful smile. "And this time, it will last longer," he added with a determined look in his eyes. The gray skies covered the busy city, filled with the roar of factories and the shrill whistle of distant trains. In a modest office building in the heart of the city, a tall man in a long coat stepped into a small room. A young black man with curly hair was hunched over a desk in the corner, carefully sketching technical designs with incredible precision. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Latimer?" the man asked, stepping closer. Lewis looked up, slightly surprised. "Yes, I am. How can I help you, sir?" The man extended his hand. "Alexander Graham Bell. I need someone skilled in technical drawings. They say you're the best in Boston." Latimer paused for a moment, then firmly shook Bell's hand. This was the beginning of everything. Bell led Lewis to a small room at the end of the hall. Blueprints and designs were scattered across a long table. Bell unrolled a large sheet of paper and laid it out for Lewis. "I need this drawn to perfection. Every wire, every connector," he said firmly. Lewis studied the sketch. It was an odd-looking device with wires coiled around a tube and a small cone at its end. "What is it?" he asked. Bell smiled. "If it works, it will let people talk to each other from miles away." "Like a telegraph?" Lewis asked. "Better. It will transmit voices, not just signals." Without further words, Lewis began to draw. His hands moved swiftly, creating perfect straight lines, precise curves, and fine details that only a trained technical draftsman could manage. Bell watched in silence, clearly impressed by Latimer's skill and speed. Day after day, Latimer arrived early and stayed late. Bell knew that a rival named Elisha Gray was also working on a similar technology. Here, Latimer's quick hands played a crucial role. Every time Bell had a new idea, Latimer would immediately transform it into flawless technical sketches. On February 14th, 1876, Bell and Latimer completed the final designs and submitted the patent application just hours before Elisha Gray did. Bell won the patent for the telephone. In that small office, Bell raised his hand triumphantly. "We did it," he exclaimed, patting Lewis on the shoulder. Latimer smiled with pride, knowing he had been part of history. But deep in his heart, there was a flicker of hope that his name would be mentioned when the history was written. Days passed, and news of the telephone spread quickly. Newspapers printed pictures of Bell smiling proudly. Reporters swarmed, praising his innovation. Bell stood on podiums, explaining how his device would change communication forever. In the back of the room, Lewis stood with a small smile, proud but invisible. No reporter asked who drew the designs. No one questioned who perfected Bell's concepts on paper. When Bell accepted awards in front of scientists and businessmen, Latimer watched from a distance. Pride and bitterness mixed in his heart. "Is this how the world works?" he thought. They needed his hands, but never spoke his name. One autumn afternoon, Bell called Latimer to his office. His large wooden desk was covered in letters and fresh blueprints. Bell smiled as Lewis entered. "Lewis, I want you to know something," he said, handing him a white envelope. Lewis opened it carefully. Inside was a recommendation letter from Bell himself, filled with praise for his skills. "Without your hands, these drawings would never have been completed. You're truly gifted, Lewis," the letter read. Bell looked him in the eye. "You're more than just help, Lewis. You're brilliant. Don't ever forget that." They shook hands firmly, and Latimer felt the warmth of genuine recognition, though only behind closed doors. Latimer learned that the world was not always fair. Great dreams were sometimes overshadowed by greater names. But he did not give up. If his name would not be known, his work would shine through the light that illuminated the world. Thick fog floated among towering factory buildings, black smoke billowing from iron chimneys roaring in the distance. Amid the bustling city, growing rapidly with technological advances, a black man with determined steps entered a large door labeled U.S. Electric Lighting Company. His name was Lewis Latimer. After parting ways with Alexander Graham Bell, Latimer continued his career in electrical engineering. At Hiram Maxim's company, Latimer began working on something entirely different: electric lighting. Working as a drafter and technician, Latimer dealt directly with the design of light bulbs, which at the time had many shortcomings. In a small room filled with rolls of wires and technical sketches, Latimer observed a light bulb flicker weekly before going dark. "The filaments. They burn out too quickly," he murmured, jotting his observations into a small notebook. For months, Latimer realized the primary problem with light bulbs was the fragility of the filaments. The materials used were too brittle and unstable, causing the bulbs to fail quickly and making mass production difficult. In his spare time, Latimer began experimenting. He tested various materials, measured heat, and studied how electrical currents flowed through wires. Until one quiet evening, under the dim glow of an oil lamp that was nearly out, Latimer discovered a new formula: a more durable carbon filament. The process he developed not only increased the lifespan of the filament, but also significantly reduced production costs. With carbon filaments, light bulbs burned brighter and lasted longer. This invention paved the way for mass production of electric lights, making them accessible to more people at affordable prices. News of Latimer's innovation spread quickly. His technology caught the attention of Thomas Edison, who then invited Latimer to join the engineering team at General Electric. For Latimer, this was a major opportunity, but he knew Edison's world was different, full of ambition and fierce competition. When he first stepped into General Electric's headquarters, all eyes turned toward him. Among the rows of well-dressed white engineers, Latimer was the only black man. Whispered voices could be heard, but he paid them no mind. For him, science and innovation knew no color. Thomas Edison entrusted Latimer to lead a small team in the development of home electrical systems. Not only did he design sketches, but Latimer also worked directly on lamp installations in major buildings across New York, including courthouses and public libraries. "If you can light up New York, you can light up the world," Edison told him one day. Latimer smiled slightly, though deep down, he knew his name might never be mentioned. In 1890, Latimer decided to pour all his knowledge into a book titled Incandescent Electric Lighting, a practical description of the Edison system. The book became the first technical manual that detailed how to install, maintain, and operate the electric lighting system. Inside its pages, Latimer not only wrote down theories, but also practical steps that young engineers could follow. Every diagram, every technical sketch was drawn by his own hands. He believed that knowledge was light, and he wanted more people to hold the key to a brighter future. The book was well received by engineers and technicians alike, even used as a reference in many technical universities. Yet, once again, his name was not publicly recognized. The book became known as Edison's Guide, even though Latimer wrote every word and drew every diagram. One day, while working in his small lab, A colleague asked him, "Latimer, don't you feel cheated? You made all these improvements, and yet nobody knows." Latimer looked at his colleague and smiled. "The light doesn't care who turned it on. It just shines," he replied calmly. His colleague fell silent, not expecting such a sincere answer. For Latimer, light was more important than his name. Every street lamp glowing in the city, every bulb lit in a living room, was a legacy he left behind, even without his signature on the patent. In the middle of the night, in his small workspace illuminated by a desk lamp, Latimer looked out at New York City glowing bright. Tall buildings shimmered with light, and the streets were lined with lamps glowing steadily. He took a deep breath and smiled softly. "This is enough," he whispered to himself. Yet, in his heart, he held a small hope. That one day, the world would know who made that light burn brighter and last longer. Tall buildings stood proudly with electric lights shining bright, illuminating the bustling city streets. Behind the grandeur, in a modest office at the end of the road, an aging man sat quietly at his wooden desk. His hair was graying, and lines of age marked his face, yet his eyes still held the fire of determination. The man was Lewis Latimer. On his desk lay stacks of technical sketches and small notebooks filled with notes. Among them were designs for incandescent lamps with the carbon filaments he had invented years ago. On the wall, certificates of appreciation from local engineering communities hung proudly. There was no mention of Edison, no sign of General Electric, only the name Lewis Latimer written in gold ink, small acknowledgments from those who truly knew, who had drawn the future with his own hands. Outside his room, newspapers were scattered along the sidewalks, bearing grand headlines. Edison receives Nobel Prize nomination for electric innovations. The bold print covered the front page, alongside a photograph of Edison smiling proudly in front of bright, glowing light bulbs. Latimer stared at the newspaper for a moment before sighing deeply. "Another one," he whispered. Behind the glare of bright lights, his name remained invisible. The world knew Edison as the creator of electric light, while Latimer was the shadow that never got mentioned. One day, Latimer tried to go further. He applied for patents for some of his smaller innovations, improvements in socket design and household electrical systems. Yet, each time he submitted, a letter would return with the same response: "Your application has been denied." Latimer looked at the rejection letter with tired eyes, but did not crumple it. Calmly, he placed it on his desk, stacking it with the others. He knew that fighting against big names like Edison would not be easy. "The light shines, but the shadows are always there," he murmured to himself. Amid his frustration, his wife, Mary, entered the room and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "You are the light, Lewis. Maybe not in their eyes, but in mine, and in the eyes of those who know," she said softly. Latimer looked up at her and smiled. "Then I guess I need to keep shining," he replied with a soft voice. Although his name was never officially recognized, Latimer never stopped working. At General Electric, he became a mentor to many young technicians. They would come with rough sketches and leave with perfected designs in their hands. "Here, draw the line straighter. Think of the current as water. It needs to flow smoothly," Latimer would instruct patiently. To the young engineers, Latimer was not just a mentor. He was an inspiration. "He's the reason I understand electricity," one technician told his colleague. "And yet, nobody knows his name," the other replied softly. For Latimer, the acknowledgement from those he taught was more than enough. Every time they succeeded in lighting a bulb without a short circuit, it felt like a small victory. In his later years, Latimer stood on the rooftop of the building where he worked. From up high, he gazed at New York City shimmering with electric lights. Every corner of the city, every street glowing with steady light, was the result of the innovation he had developed. Even though his name was not in the newspapers, even though there were no trophies or grand awards on his desk, Latimer knew one thing. He had lit up the world. That night, a young technician joined him on the rooftop. "Mr. Latimer, don't you regret it? That your name isn't known?" he asked cautiously. Latimer smiled as he looked at the shining lights. "You see those lights?" The technician nodded. "I'm in every one of them," Latimer replied with a calm, contented smile. The night wore on, and the lights continued to glow throughout the city. Latimer returned to his workspace, sitting quietly in his worn wooden chair. In front of him lay stacks of sketches and old designs scattered across the desk. Among them, an old letter rested, the application for a patent that was never approved. He took a deep breath, then reached for a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. With trembling hands, he wrote, "For the future, so that the light may never fade." He folded the paper carefully and slipped it between the pages of his thickest notebook. One day he thought they will know. The night sky blanketed the city that never slept. Electric lights shone brightly, lining the streets and radiating from towering buildings. At the corner of the street, an old man walked slowly, his hand gently touching the iron lampposts that stood tall. His hair had turned white, his body had grown frail, but his smile remained the same, warm and full of meaning. That man was Lewis Latimer. That evening, the winter wind blew softly, bringing a chill that nipped at the skin. Latimer walked slowly along the sidewalks, his gaze fixed ahead, admiring the rows of streetlights glowing without a flicker. Occasionally, he would stop, placing his hand on the cold metal of the lamppost. His eyes would close for a moment, as if feeling the flow of electricity coursing through it. At the corner of the street, a young boy playing with a ball approached him. "Why do you touch the light, mister?" the boy asked innocently. Latimer opened his eyes and looked at the boy with a gentle smile. "Because it's still here, and so am I." The boy nodded, though he probably didn't fully understand what Latimer meant. He ran back to his friends, while Latimer remained standing, watching the light shine bright in the middle of the dark night. To him, every light that illuminated the city was his legacy, even if his name was never engraved on it. In his small home in Brooklyn, Latimer spent his final days with his wife, Mary, and his two daughters, Jeanette and Louise. Every morning, he would sit at his desk, writing small notes about electricity and drawing technical sketches. In the corner of the room, Jeanette and Louise often watched him with curiosity. "Papa, how does the light work?" Jeanette asked one afternoon. Latimer smiled, reaching for a notebook and beginning to draw. "Here," he said, showing her a simple diagram of electric currents. "It flows just like water. If there are no blockages, it shines brightly." From that moment, his daughters began to learn. Jeanette grew up to become an education activist, fighting for access to technology for young black children in New York. Meanwhile, Louise became a technical instructor at a local school, teaching electricity and technology to the next generation. Together, they founded the Latimer Learning Center, a technical training center for underprivileged youth, teaching electricity and engineering fundamentals just as their father had taught them. His legacy lived on, even though great fame never came to their name. A thin layer of snow covered the city streets. In a small house in Brooklyn, Lewis Latimer lay peacefully in his bed. Mary sat beside him, holding his hand tightly. In the corner of the room, Jeanette and Louise stood with tears welling in their eyes. Latimer took a deep breath, his eyes gazing at the dim ceiling. "I guess it's time to rest," he whispered softly. Mary squeezed his hand tighter, holding back the sob that threatened to break. New York City shone bright that night, with electric lights illuminating every street, breaking through the cold darkness. In his study, stacks of technical sketches and handwritten notes lay scattered across his desk. An old oil lamp burned gently beside his open notebook, casting faint shadows on the walls. At his funeral, Young engineers who had once learned from him came carrying technical sketches as a form of respect. His tombstone was simple, engraved with the words, "He lit the world with his hands." A few years after his death, history began to uncover Latimer's contributions that had been long overshadowed. His manual, incandescent electric lighting started being studied in technical universities and engineering communities. His name began to appear in seminars and technology discussions. At a technology conference in New York, a young engineer stood at the podium and spoke proudly. "If it weren't for Lewis Latimer, many of us wouldn't be here today. He is the man who lit the world." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, Latimer's name was honored in a public space. Not long after, a plaque was mounted in front of the General Electric building with the inscription, "In memory of Lewis Latimer, the light that endures." That night, in the small room of Latimer's house, an old oil lamp still burned. Beside it, his sketchbook lay open, revealing his handwriting on the final page. "For those who follow, may you find the light and carry it forward." His light may have gone out, but his legacy did not. Like the lights that continued to shine throughout New York City, the touch of Lewis Latimer would keep illuminating the future.